Innovación y, cómo no, sostenibilidad. Fabricamos una nueva economía y un mundo nuevo, en 3D, por supuesto. Pero sobre todo, fabricamos futuro. Y es que fabricamos empleo para más de 137.000 trabajadores. Fabricamos oportunidades globales de negocio en un espacio de más de 10 millones de metros cuadrados. Y fabricamos servicios de vanguardia y ventajas competitivas para más de 175 empresas. Consorcio de la Zona Franca. Fabricamos oportunidades para tu futuro.
Welcome to D-Factory, the factory that develops talent, technology, innovation, and of course in the heart of Barcelona. After all, D-Factory is consolidating Barcelona as a European capital of development for Industry 4.0, for digitalization, for transformation, creating 1,500 direct jobs and 5,000 indirect jobs in the city, close to the metro, the harbour and the airport. And promoted by the Consorcio de la Zona Franca de Barcelona.
It's a time of changes. Now is the time to move on. This is the time for solutions. Feel the motion. BNEW is born. BNEW none of you. No one connected to you. BNEW none of you. BNEW will do it for you. This is the time for solutions. BNEW is for you.
Buenas tardes, último panel de esta tercera jornada ya del BNEW antes de reemprender la segunda jornada en esta tarde que también nos depara muchas sorpresas como un Inspirational Talks. Bien, BNEW es muchas cosas, es Green Deal, está comprometido con la Agenda 2030, también es una plataforma multisectorial, transversal y cumple con todas las normas higiénico-sanitarias. Y precisamente en este aspecto, después de 3 ediciones, podemos celebrar ya recuperar una presencialidad prácticamente 100%, porque es un evento híbrido, también tenemos conexiones digitales, pero este año, por ejemplo, en este panel contaremos también con la presencia de expertos que vienen de Suiza, de Estados Unidos, etcétera. Bien, nosotros, ¿por qué ahora ponemos el acento en estas medidas médico-sanitarias? Pues porque este panel tratará sobre las inversiones en biotech, cómo la pandemia, la COVID, si le damos la vuelta a toda la historia, también nos ha aportado una mayor capacidad de inversión y de futuro en este aspecto que se ha convertido en imprescindible. Gracias a la inversión se consiguió una vacuna en tiempo récord, en menos de un año, y pudimos tener toda la población vacunada contra la COVID. Bien, de la COVID y de otros aspectos, por ejemplo, de cómo mejorar las instalaciones actuales en BioSearch o cómo contribuir a la biotecnología, es de lo que trataremos en este BINVESTINBIOTECH. Nuevamente contamos con Courtney Finger, que es nuestra moderadora de referencia en este panel. Good morning, Courtney. Y también contaremos con una conexión desde Massachusetts i deixeu-me fer la referència en català pel doctor Pasqual. Bona tarda, doctor.
Perdona'm.
Bé, farmacèutic. Correcte, enginyer especialitzat en biomedicina, que també ens alegra tenir aquesta representació catalana perquè el BNEW se emite desde Barcelona, desde este D-Factory, el mayor nodo de la industria 4.0 de Barcelona. Muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to lead this panel. Now, we previously had a session where we talked about the future of FDI, and one of the topics that came up among our sectoral discussion was the future of medical and how that will lend itself to the future of FDI, and that is because, of course, biotech, medtech, healthcare, these are all major FDI sectors, and for the very obvious reasons during the pandemic were among the few growth sectors that we saw at a time when global FDI levels collapsed. So it's very important for investment promotion officials and those running free zones to understand where the future of healthcare is taking us if they want to attract these very high value, quite sexy, I must add, projects in this very highly sought after sector. So we have some experts here to talk us through it. Hopefully they can talk to us at a bit of a high level, because certainly not an expert in biotech or healthcare myself, and many of the people watching will not be, but it's important to understand where things are going, how healthcare has been revolutionized by the pandemic or other major developments in macro trends, and where that is taking us, so that we can understand what companies like those you are running need, what kind of support, what makes a conducive business environment. So welcome to our two in-studio panelists and one virtual panelist. They are joining us virtually. Kauthar Labiati, who's a biotech executive and a board member for the US at Hepion Pharmaceuticals. Welcome to you. Joining us here in person, we have Christian Pasquale, co-founder and CEO of Medictor, which uses artificial intelligence for triage and pre-diagnosis. He's also been a business angel for the past 12 years and is involved in roughly 15 startups. We also have John Klepper, CEO and co-founder of Pipra, which has developed an AI-based preoperative risk prediction software. I hope I got that correct as a succinct description. I would like to start with Kauthar, who can maybe tell us a little bit about some of the headline trends and themes. So in your mind, what are the main biotech investment themes that will shape the industry in the next decade? Quite a big question.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Courtney. Thank you to BNEW for inviting me to speak in this panel. I'm very happy to share the panel with John and Pasquale. To answer your questions, I think I need to start by saying that more than 2/3 of the 52 billion that went to biotech healthcare between 2019 and between 2019 and 2021 went to startups with platforms. And the most predominant ones were the cell therapy platforms and the gene therapies. Followed by precision medicine. This is quite revolutionary. And also the machine learning enabled drug discovery platforms, which is an area that we need to pay attention to as well. There were, of course, other areas where the funding went. So the other third, or $17 billion, which went to the oncology as a whole, immuno-oncology and other areas of oncology, followed by the neurosciences. Unfortunately, there were some losers, which were the infectious diseases and the antimicrobial or antibiotic resistance R&D. It did not capture more than $2 billion. And this is quite staggering, because this is vital for humanity. But the business model is not very promising. So the profitability is delayed, and this is not very interesting for big pharma. So that was for healthcare. Biotech is more than healthcare. Biotech is also food and agriculture and other areas as well. So synthetic biology is a field that is growing and is part of the bioeconomy as a whole, which will grow up to $30 trillion globally. And in 2021, the area of synthetic biology in food and agriculture captured $17 billion in 2021 alone, right? So those are the areas in biotech for healthcare and the synthetic biology for biotech, healthcare, and food and agriculture.
Thank you very much. It's very useful to understand where the money is flowing and where it's not, because that gives us a bit of a map of the industry. We're going to pick back up on some of these segments, I think, that you identified. But first, I want to ask the two gentlemen here, because you are leading companies that, of course, both involved in AI in one way or another. In your mind, how has COVID revolutionized the healthcare industry, and what new investment opportunities might have opened up as a result? I'll start with John.
It's a pleasure to be here with these two wonderful panelists and with yourself. Thank you to BNEW for this opportunity. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of trends that have opened up due to COVID. Certainly telemedicine is one that's been talked about a lot. I think it's really exciting, whereas a couple years ago, if you wanted to get a hold of your doctor, you basically had to have an appointment, you had to go in. Nowadays, you can text message, you can video chat. This opens up all kinds of opportunities for technology, for using data to help diagnose, to get rapid response, to make accurate diagnoses and treatment. There's also a really interesting space in mental health, which is opening up. I think there's a big disparity that we see in terms of the number of people who need mental health, largely because of COVID, which is rising exponentially, and the number of therapists that are actually available. And so you're starting to see these new technologies emerge using artificial intelligence, where you have AI-driven bots, essentially, that help you to work on whatever the issues might be. For some people, it's actually a preferred choice because they have some resistance to talking to another human, but they're comfortable talking to an artificial voice, let's say. So these are a couple of areas that I think are really interesting and seeing a lot of growth and a lot of investment.
And what's the role? I mean, you mentioned already about some of the technologies and AI. Is AI now at the heart of every aspect of healthcare?
So I think the latest stat I saw was 90% of healthcare organizations are using AI in some way or another. So if you're an industry in healthcare and you're not using AI, you probably want to think about adopting that. Globally, I think in 2021 it was 50% of industries were using AI, and now it's 56%.
Okay, so that's some important numbers. Is there anything you would add to that? And also from the investor perspective, where do you yourself see opportunities? Where are you putting your money?
Well, I think that COVID just triggered something that was needed even before COVID, that is a change in healthcare because we have major challenges in healthcare that we need to overcome in the short term. Our healthcare systems are collapsing somehow. We have a global lack of physicians, and this is why AI fits so well, because we need to empower physicians to make more and better, and we need to empower patients to care of themselves and do more. So in this journey, we'll see a huge change in how healthcare is delivered in the next few years to come. And the demonstration that this is happening is because last year was the record highest investment in health tech. It's 44 billion, as Startup Health announced globally. It was doubling the figure the year before. And this is what is coming. Also, I think that healthcare by itself will become the biggest industry in the world one day. This is also predicted by McKinsey. And it makes sense because the healthcare we know today will change a lot. It's just the peak of the iceberg on what will be in the future. Will take care of people not to get ill instead of just treating ill people. Will be continuous, will be
And preventative,
virtual,
I guess.
preventive, will be personalized. So there's a huge change coming, and the money is flowing there. Even also shifted, published this semester the first figures for Europe. Now healthcare is leading the seed investment. So despite that the venture capital this year had a fall down, healthcare now evolved to be one of the where the money is flowing, because I think the opportunity is unbuilt and it's great.
Okay, and are there any geographies where you see opportunities as opposed to technologies and segments of the market?
Well, I think that one interesting thing about healthcare is it's global. I mean, it's a general need, and on my perspective, and for our company, Medictor, we work in 26 countries right now. We see that besides that people think that they are different, we are the same. I mean, we are the same animal, and it's a global problem. Of course, to address it locally needs different things, but it's a global problem. And I think that, of course, Europe, US, Asia, but all of them are doing great things.
Thank you. And please, did you want to add something, John?
Yeah, just to add some great points. Interesting, Africa is seeing a huge amount of money pouring in, 1.7 billion, I think, into Africa alone last year. And I think it's a really exciting place. There's a lot of things, different kinds of diseases that are very easily preventable, such as, eye diseases, eye-related diseases, that can be actually easily diagnosed using artificial intelligence. It's something that takes a physician usually a tremendous amount of time to look at an image and try to understand what might be there. AI can do this in such a fraction of the amount of time and often outperform the physician, and at a fraction of the cost. So in places like in Africa, where there might be, a lack of physicians, as you mentioned, there's a lot of money and a lot of investment being poured in to look at some of these areas and preventable diseases.
That's extremely interesting, but are there any constraints in terms of deploying AI technology in developing countries? Is it AI enabled, as it were, in order to be able to make use of some of these advances?
Certainly it's in progress, but as we look to the future, technologies are getting more accessible, they're getting a lower price point. So I think we're just at the beginning of really a revolution in healthcare, particularly in emerging markets.
Thank you. And if we stick on the line of the geographic focus, I want to return to Kauthar and ask about China. Now, China's obviously become a major player in the biotech space. How do you see China's impact and role in the global biopharma industry in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, if we speak about the next 5 years or 10 years, things will look quite different. But I think China will continue to build upon the achievements that it has realized in the last 5 years, and it will become even a greater contributor to the global biopharma ecosystem as a whole. Despite the regulatory constraints that you alluded to, and despite the geopolitical uncertainties that we are all aware of. I mean, in the last 5 years, the China-originated biopharma companies have secured the capital for their growth. They have sealed some partnerships with the Western mature big pharma. They have already a global footprint. I mean, they have subsidiaries in most of the European and American biopharma hub. In terms of manufacturing, this is a top capability for China, and it will continue to be so in the next 5 years. specifically in the area of biologics, so monoclonal antibodies, for example, they have a big share already. And this capability of manufacturing monoclonal antibodies will double in 2023. The share of R&D is growing more than 10% per year across all the biopharmaceutical, the Chinese biopharma companies. So I think the question today is, what are the innovations that are China originated that will come to the global patients? Here we have two areas. You have the fast follower kind of innovation that is originated from China. And this will be mainly in the small molecules, in oncology, in monoclonal antibodies, so the biologics. And these will serve mainly the emerging markets, for example, Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. And you have the breakthrough innovations. So it is not excluded that in the next 5 years, we see a first-in-class coming from the field of technology-enabled or AI, machine learning-enabled drug discovery. When I say first-in-class, it's a first-in-class ahead of US, Japan, and Europe. I mean, this is an area that has captured a lot of funding. I think we have 7 companies, Chinese companies, out of the top 20 that are working in this field. So I do not exclude to see in the next 5 years a first-in-class coming from China. mRNA is also an area that is promising, and the cell therapy, they are really accelerating the progress in cell gene therapy. So 3 areas to watch very closely.
Thank you very much. And if we think a little closer to home, or at least closer to where we are sitting here, and that's the Mediterranean region, how do you see that this region could benefit from some of the global capital converging around biopharma post-COVID?
This is a very interesting, promising, but tricky question. The low middle income countries, or specifically the South Mediterranean region, the African continent, as John alluded to, it has captured a lot of funds during COVID. The issue there, when I say a lot of funds, sorry, across sectors, is 4 billion. So quite substantial for the continent, maybe not in comparison with what is raised in China or the United States or Europe, but quite substantial for the continent. The problem here is that you have 60% of this fund that is going to fintech and to e-commerce. And you have only 8% of the 4 billion that are coming to the biopharma industry and the life sciences. There is an ecosystem. There is a biomedical ecosystem that is nascent and rapidly developing in Africa, but it is lacking funds, and it is immature. So when I say it is lacking funds, I have mentioned that the 8% as a share of the global funding that is coming to Africa. But in terms of R&D, for example, Africa receives only 1% of the global investment in R&D. This is a figure from 2016. During COVID, the global effort to run clinical trials and come up with medicines and vaccines, Africa did not participate in this clinical trial. So this is really an inequity. When I spoke about the immaturity of the ecosystem in Africa, I think where we need to, where the global community needs to act is to help with the acceleration of the maturation of this ecosystem. For example, to teach how to spin off from academia and how to transfer the intellectual properties and the advances in research that exist, how to transfer them into biopharma pipeline and commercialize them. I think the most important strategy that I cannot wait to emphasize upon is the strategic partnerships with global industrial players. And there is a precedent, that will be my last point. There is a precedent. In the area of precision medicine, for example, you have a startup that is based in Nigeria that has raised, by the way, I think $14 million since 2019. And it has built partnerships with Genentech, which is Roche, and with Illumina. And this is very important because it tackles an area where precision medicine in Africa is seeing a lot of inequity. So yeah, there are a lot of things to do to promote equity in Africa in the area of healthcare and capital flow.
Thank you very much. Would either of you like to comment on or add to anything that Kauthar said? And also I'd tack on a question of what are we missing from this discussion, other challenges, opportunities we should be thinking about. I'll pick on John first.
So yeah, I'll consult my notes. Got some notes here. So I think, I mentioned other, in terms of other opportunities, I mentioned eye-related diseases. 2.2 billion people suffer from visual impairment. 1 billion of those diseases are preventable. So this is a really major issue that's going to continue to grow significantly. Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is another very, very preventable disease that very often doesn't get treated.
In layman's terms, what is that?
It's lung-related diseases.
Okay.
So you have it's just, through scans, through AI technology, you can see where there's find where these issues are very quickly, very inexpensively. Mm-hmm. In the UK, 1% population dies from these related diseases, so it's quite significant. I think there's a lot of really interesting innovation in AI at the microprocessor level, which is affecting all different kinds of companies. And when it comes to healthcare, I think there's a new generation of doctors that are emerging, where I believe I think the older generation often looks at AI like, I don't need a software to tell me how to do my job, right? Mm-hmm. And they see it as a threat. Whereas the newer generation are embracing AI, and what it allows is less time having to go through patient history, mm-hmm. figure out all this huge amounts of data that surround a person's health, their history, and try to come up with an understanding in a few minutes that you're with the patient. Be able to use technology like AI to support as a clinical decision support, for example, to then be able to spend more time with the patient face-to-face, communicating, discussing, mm-hmm. right? Because
that's creating an efficiency, essentially.
It's creating an efficiency, definitely. So this is one of the things that we've created at PIPRA. We've developed a AI-based risk assessment software that is done pre-surgically, so patients come to the hospital and the anesthesiologist asks various different questions, and we extract some of that relevant information, some risk factors in the background, and we produce a risk calculation based on AI mm-hmm. for a problem called delirium. So post-operative delirium is very common. It affects 20% of patients over 60. 20% of patients over 60. It represents, delirium as a whole represents a greater cost to healthcare than diabetes, 60% greater cost. It's one of the major problems in healthcare that's unaddressed. And until now, we weren't able to really have a solution. Once you have delirium, there's nothing you can do about it, but it is preventable.
Right.
You need to know which patients are going to have this complication. So with our software, within seconds, you have a very accurate risk stratification of whether a patient is a low risk, medium, high, or very high risk, and then you can alter the patient pathway for those high-risk patients. That way they leave the hospital better than when they arrived, and not the opposite.
Well, these are some quite exciting developments, and are we missing something from the discussion? And is the money flowing in the right place in terms of, I guess, the capital needed to help spur these advances and to keep innovation flowing?
Well, I think, of course, capital looks for revenue, for return on investment, and the main markets of innovation in the world, everybody knows. I mean, it's the US, China, a lot of it's doing a lot, and Europe. But in healthcare, what is happening is that there's huge problem in accessing to healthcare in many places. And we are talking about huge problem. I mean, no way of accessing to a doctor for some people in the world. It's something that has to concern everybody. And I think that with technology, we can now allow new ways for these people to have access to healthcare in a sustainable way for everybody. Of course, we need money to do that, and there's some organizations also pouring big money into that. And also, I see that as an opportunity to not only help people, but to use this technology in a very good way. We are participating also with some foundations working in this direction, and it's a very interesting one that everybody should care. Not only return of investment, that it's good, but there's another side of the equation also.
Please go ahead.
Keep interrupting.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Can you or anyone guess what the annual compound growth rate for AI market is?
No.
42.4%. Staggering.
It is.
Yeah.
So today the market is 14 billion, and within 7 years it's estimated 164 billion. So when investors are looking at where to invest,
Those are pretty good figures.
these are pretty good figures, right? So AI in healthcare is expected to be 8 times larger in the next 7 years. So
the bioeconomy as well, John, because you have provoked with the 164 billion. I would like to provoke with $30 trillion is the size of the valuation of the bioeconomy. Biotech and biomanufacturing. So this is the synthetic biology with AI are the two leading fields for investors.
Yes, you're right to remind us of that bigger piece of the pie and what all the word bio encompasses. I want to take advantage of having 2 startup founders here because a lot of the investment promotion agencies and those involved in the world of FDI are really keen to attract startups and also to cultivate and have homegrown startups. What do you need from them? And I'll throw this question to you, Kauthar, as well, in terms of on the private company side. What do you need from the jurisdictions in which you operate your companies to help?
That's a tough question because we work in an over-regulated market already.
So you want them to leave you alone?
Sorry?
You want them to leave you alone?
Yeah, at least don't change anything else because it's pretty complicated as it is today. But of course, many regulations in many places are not thought for, and I'm talking again for health tech. And it's a challenge to do it and they will change. I mean, data privacy, AI ethics, this is things that are, well, in Europe, there's a law coming on AI ethics. I think that's interesting because it's one of these times that the law will come even before that we see a massive adoption of this technology in healthcare. So another challenge ahead, but all these challenges, I think, that are good for the patient, for the safety of the patient. So, well, I think that I would ask to ease our way, but I don't think that this will be possible.
Thank you. What's on your wish list?
Well, some very good points. I think that the regulatory landscape is very, very complicated. It is a two-sided coin, because on the one hand, it's very difficult to cross that barrier and to get the certifications that you need. But on the other hand, it's good for the patient to ensure that there are tools that are well regulated and aren't going to cause more harm, especially in AI, where you have a lot of black box technologies, which is great when everything works well, but what if it doesn't work well? Where do you find the problem? How do you fix that problem? So those regulations are good to some degree. I agree that they could be a little bit less of an uphill climb and a little shorter in time frames, but that also, it also provides some business protection for companies that have certification regulation, because it's such an uphill battle and it takes so much money to cross that. So, I mean, I think one of the areas, to answer your question, I think access to capital is, for a startup, is everything. It's the number one or the number two, depending on which survey you look at. The number one or two reason why startups fail is because they don't have enough capital. And what we see, if we look geographically in the United States, we have massive amounts of capital, especially from Silicon Valley, of course, right? Where you see 50% of the global capital in startups coming from the United States, right? About 25% in Europe, about 25% in Asia, roughly speaking. So that's a huge difference. And what does that money buy you? You end up with now 50% of the world's unicorns coming out of the United States, right?
Yeah, it's quite an imbalance still.
Huge imbalance. So what's interesting is that while markets have declined, this quarter dropped 23%, I think, which is the largest quarter-on-quarter drop in the last 6 quarters. In Europe, it's only dropped 13%. That's interesting. Right. In healthcare, that is. So, yeah, I think access to capital. Oh, by the way, that drop, we're still now, even though it's dropped 23%, it's still the 6th highest quarter on record. So we are back to where we were 6 quarters ago, at a more like normal type of investing, normal valuations in company. I think over the last 6 quarters, we saw these massive valuations in companies, and investors were just throwing money at startups, right? So now it's a little bit
more sustainable.
Yeah, it's still a bit more sustainable. Maybe a little bit smarter investments happening, but it's still a huge amount of money out there. But access to capital is massively important, not just from investors, but also from government, where you see regions deploying a lot of capital into startup ecosystems. You see a lot of growth happening there as well.
Thank you.
And maybe I should add that we have a challenge on how innovation flows in public health. And that's a major challenge, because it's designed not to buy innovation. And public health is the big animal on healthcare.
Well, of course. Yeah.
So we have a challenge there. And maybe to be even more precise, we should address all over development countries how to reimburse and pay virtual visits to physicians. And this is something that if we don't do it, we will not see a real evolution in virtual care. So to address it to one point, reimbursement in telemedicine for public health.
Yeah, it's a big debate in most countries. It rages in the UK, for example, and other places. Kauthar, we only have a couple minutes left, so we'll need your elevator pitch for what the public sector can do to help.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a wish list. It's a long one, but since we have only 2 minutes, I'll make it short. Protection of patients healthcare data is extremely important. It goes. I mean, you can use a lot of ways to do that. Blockchain is one of them. Blockchain technology. The second thing, I would like to see equity in access to healthcare across the low, middle, and development countries. And when to build upon what John mentioned, equity and access to capital, I would go a little bit further. I would love to see, whenever the capital flows to regions like the continent, like Africa, for example, or the Southeast of Asia, I would like to see value created locally before exits of these startups. I wouldn't want to see only capital flow in, growth, scaling, and then exit with all the money outside. I'd like to see the value in the low middle income countries in healthcare.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you do have more on your list, but we'll have to save it for another time. Thank you very much. The discussion went quite quickly. Thank you for keeping it top line enough that we can understand it, but giving us a lot to think about. Great insights, and you're all really fantastic with the statistics. You had them all to hand. Thank you very much also to our audience for your attention, and I will hand back over now.
An almost real-time update on what's going to happen is really interesting and necessary, no? Thank you all, Mr. John Clipper, Mrs. Kuchar-Viati, and Mr. Christian Pascual, and especially you, Courtney. And thank you to speak about the importance of startups. ¿No? Nosotros ahora mismo estamos en el D-Factory y es realmente importante subrayar la importancia de esta incubadora 4.0. Bien, nosotros ahora sí que hacemos ya la primera pausa de este primer bloque del canal Invest para retomar toda la agenda y todo el directo a partir de las 4 del mediodía, hora española. Nos vemos desde aquí siguiendo impulsando la nueva economía desde la Barcelona New Economy Week. Muchas gracias y hasta luego.
Fabricamos talento, fabricamos innovación y, cómo no, sostenibilidad. Fabricamos una nueva economía y un mundo nuevo, en 3D, por supuesto. Pero sobre todo, fabricamos futuro. Y es que fabricamos empleo para más de 137.000 trabajadores. Fabricamos oportunidades globales de negocio en un espacio de más de 10 millones de metros cuadrados. Y fabricamos servicios de vanguardia y ventajas competitivas para más de 175 empresas. Consorcio de la Zona Franca. Fabricamos oportunidades para tu futuro.
Welcome to D-Factory, the factory that develops talent, technology, innovation, and of course in the heart of Barcelona. After all, D-Factory is consolidating Barcelona as a European capital of development for Industry 4.0, for digitalization, for transformation, creating 1,500 direct jobs and 5,000 indirect jobs in the city, close to the metro, the harbour and the airport. And promoted by the Consorcio de la Zona Franca de Barcelona.